All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the Edge of the Earth podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Jarman. Find us on YouTube, The Jeff Jarman Show, and also on Spreaker.com. You can do Spreaker.com/user/Edge of the Earth if you are tech savvy and want to go through that. Also, plenty of links on Facebook, obviously. Today I have a returning guest for the Edge of the Earth podcast. It is Schyler Silvey. Schyler, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah.
And we're going to discuss a topic that you're very passionate about, and I think a lot of people are. It's something that affects all of us, really, and that is gun control. So a lot of people have a very passionate stance on this, like I said earlier, and they, you got one crowd who's saying we need better gun control, so maybe take them all away so that nobody can get killed. And then you got the other side saying, I'll die before you take my guns. And then you got the middle somewhere, and I think that's where you and I both are. So why don't you just kind of tell me how you feel about gun control and where we should start to correct this problem?
What I basically feel about it is, I do want to clarify, actually, before I even go into it at all, I am not a part of the NRA. In fact, I'm not actually a big fan of the NRA in general.
Yeah, that makes two of us.
And I feel that they're too far on the right end of the spectrum for me to, advocate their existence. And also, I am not on the on that really anywhere on the opposite end either. The liberal side, but I want to say that I think you've already said that, but I'm also want to clarify the difference between gun control and gun regulation. I think the majority of people are all for gun regulation, which is like keeping crazy people from owning a gun, such as people on Social Security for mental reasons, from legally purchasing a firearm, or felons. Which, although I'm on the side of the belief that thinks that non-violent felons should still be permitted to go through a legal process to allow them to have a gun.
Yeah, that's a tough spot right there.
But, I mean, as long as they were not arrested for violent and or gang-related activity.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I mean, I would have no issue with it. If they were just some guy
who... charges.
Yeah, if some guy was just smoking pot in his backyard and got busted with like 5 pounds,
right,
and never owned a gun or killed a person or punched a person in his life, why would it be fair to remove that right from him, even if he didn't want the gun?
Yeah.
I mean, it's still, whether or not somebody wants it, that doesn't mean that it should be taken away from them.
Yeah, so basically you're saying that it's almost like a second chance type thing, but for the non-violent criminals.
Same thing. I will say the same thing for voting that I would for guns in this argument. So,
take away the voting for criminals.
Felons, a lot of if you're a felon, you can't vote.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Or should I say, if you're a non-violent felon, I don't know if I specified that, you can't vote.
Yeah.
I think that's dumb. But anyway, so no, the point is though, around the United States, every time there is anything that involves a weapon, they immediately blame said weapon. And understandably so, out of fear and whatnot. I kind of get it. I don't agree, but I get it. So you have these states like California being one of the biggest ones in the entire country. That is huge anti-guns, firearms. And then, or if you want to take away one of the states and just say Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is probably the worst place in the entire country in this particular topic. That Washington, D.C. actually has the most gun control of the entire country.
Yeah.
Which is, to my mind, very ironic, which I will mention later. But the thing is so you got these few states. Actually, it's not really a few. There's several of them that have this law called Stand Your Ground. And essentially, based on this law, they have basically no gun control to speak of, and either very light or moderate on their gun regulations.
Florida would be one of those, correct?
Huh?
Florida would be one of those states, right?
I think so.
I hear about that all the time in Florida.
One of the biggest ones and the most talked about would be Vermont. And I do find it super interesting because California has the exact opposite extreme when it comes to gun control and their gun violence. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of things that I would say come into play with what I'm about to say. I'm not trying to suggest that gun control, the lack of, is the fix-all. Okay? But what I am going to say is interesting, point out that California, according to 2010 statistics, which is the only statistics I can freaking find from a neutral source, that thereby being the FBI, that reflect the overall thing. And 2010, I mean, we all know the majority, if not all, of their laws were well already put in place by that point. And essentially, at that time, in that statistic, they had well over 1,000 people get killed by guns, primarily pistols, and contrary to a popular belief, and to be more exact, 1,257 people were killed.
I wish we could be more specific in terms of how much of that was gang-related violence as opposed to, regular domestic.
Yeah, and there are statistics on that. I couldn't really find them, and like they call them hate crimes. It was the closest I could find to what would be called gang-related. I mean, and that's kind of a slippery slope.
Yeah.
But here's the interesting thing, and I mentioned earlier, District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., they have more strict in California, and theirs is 99 that year for total firearms. I mean, down there, I mean, it's just shocking that anybody even had a gun. I mean, it's actually pretty close to being that bad in D.C. Washington, D.C., they require a permit for you to purchase any weapon. It requires firearm registration, assault weapon law, meaning no assault weapons, and .50 BMG rifles, which is 50 caliber rifles, are prohibited. Magazine capacity limits. Your driver's license, or firearm registration license, I should say, is required. Carry permits for long guns, but not handguns. Or should I say, the vice versa is true. Open carry, nope. NFA weapons restricted, yes. Automatics. Peaceable journey laws, nope. And background checks, absolutely. So, I mean, they're pretty freaking strict. I mean, and that's just a summary. I'm sure there is a lot more stuff than that.
But still, with the DC only having 131 murders, that's pretty low compared to California.
Well, no, it wasn't 131, it was 99.
Well, 99 total firearms.
It is, but this is where you have to weigh in population and stuff like that. And gang activity, as you pointed out. I mean, there's a lot of other factors that take place, but whenever you add in the point that their gun law is very strict, it's basically gun prohibition with almost to that point. And actually, some guns are straight up prohibited. So I mean, if you even look at it's one of those things where it's interesting how it's prohibited and that more people are killed with something that is prohibited, like alcohol in the day. So then you take that into consideration, and then you're like, okay, well, stand your ground places you would think would not be any better. Because of the social stigma, you would be led to believe that taking away all guns is actually the course of action.
What about the state of Georgia? Do you know what the law is there?
Not offhand, but I was going to lead to a point, and that was that Vermont, one of the most popular states that has almost as many people as Washington, D.C., almost 600,000 population, okay, has only 2 people were killed.
Wow.
2. Now, on a 2011 statistic on their website, that increased to 5. That's still single digits. And it's really just insane, the weird amount. And then you go to all these other states that have the same type of laws. South Dakota, 8, okay, and then North Dakota, 4, New Hampshire, 5, and New Hampshire has over 1 million people in that state.
Yeah, but then you look at a state like Texas, which is very pro-gun, and they have 805.
Actually, turns out that's not true. They are not pro-gun. They actually are almost as strict as California.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean, I thought the same thing, and it was weird. Like, because I can go over here, and now they're kind of like, the best way to put it is they're very similar to, they're like a kind of slightly more extreme version of Missouri.
Okay.
So,
it's interesting because you have to look at these states based on like what cities are there. Like California, obviously, lots of firearm deaths, lots of gang violence. You have a place like Georgia, lots of well, I wouldn't say lots, but more than average with 376 firearm deaths, and that's got Atlanta. And then you have like Michigan, which is pretty high, and that has Detroit, which is known for gang violence.
Yeah.
All these really densely populated areas seem to have a lot of firearm murders.
Now, here's Texas and few gun laws, and again, I said that they're closer to Missouri. They do not have a requirement for you to get a permit to purchase a gun. There is no firearm registration, and that's actually common. Most of the states don't have firearm registration. They don't require a license, which they wouldn't if you didn't need firearm registration. What I wasn't aware is they don't actually have an assault weapon law, which is interesting. I wasn't aware of that. I was aware that they do not have a gun capacity restriction, which is very common as well. Carry license issued, it's basically the same thing. They do allow open carry, but then they go into details about that, and that's forbidden if it's black powder or long gun.
Okay.
And actually, on their carry license, if it's concealed can carry, then yes, they require it. Because they have the basic answers, and they go into more detail after that. They do have peaceable journey laws, and castle doctrine is effect, but it's restricted. You have to do other things before you can just shoot an invader.
Okay.
Like, you have to attempt to call the cops and stuff like that. That may have changed since then. But anyway, yeah, so Texas is more strict than Missouri, definitely more strict than Vermont. And they
still have one of the higher death rates.
Yeah, and also the other thing to consider, immigration.
Yeah, that's true.
They have a totally different factor to factor in, which is unique compared to a lot of the other states.
Yeah, that's true. Even with New York having more dense population and even they have a lot of immigrants coming into the country.
I mean, I used to be the naive guy who used to say all these guys who complain about immigration are jerks. And then I really started. I went and started working afterwards, because keep in mind this immigration topic has been around for a while. And when I started employment, I started noticing a lot of the similar complaints. And then really what I noticed was a friend of mine actually got fired from where he was working in favor of an illegal immigrant.
Huh.
Because he got less pay, or the guy had to pay less.
Yeah,
to the illegal
that
immigrant.
happens a lot, I think.
And this was in Bolivar.
Wow. Yeah, that's one of Donald Trump's main things that he's running on.
Bolivar, Missouri.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the state. It is in the middle. It is you can't just immigrate from Mexico into Missouri. There's a long drive, or walk, or hitchhike.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know. I find it interesting. So Missouri is actually more strict than Vermont, which is, to my mind, is strange. You know, because Missouri's people who live here know how the mentality is. And in Texas, like what you said, I understand why you thought that, because the mentality in Texas, the consensus amongst the people, the citizens, would be more open to guns than it would be in California.
Right.
And as a friend of mine pointed out too, you got to also consider urban versus rural.
Yeah.
Mentalities.
Yeah, that's true. And I think a lot of those are urban and in areas where there could be gang violence. But then again, maybe I'm too hard on that. I don't know. I doubt it, though. There is a lot of gang violence.
There's actually a statistic that I read a long time ago, and I've tried to find it actually before we started recording, and I couldn't. And essentially, in California, specifically, whites African Americans are primarily, as racist as people could argue here. I'm talking statistics, not racism.
Right.
Okay, the amount of African Americans in California that happen to be gang-related people are higher than those of white by a large margin.
Yeah. Okay,
here's the other thing. African Americans across the entire United States make up, if I remember correctly, about 14% of the population. Okay? Very tiny percent. And yet, tie the Caucasian people for the most murders across the entire state of California.
Yeah, and that goes into a whole other issue with gang violence and how we can prevent these people from getting involved in this in the first place. We're already out of time for this episode. I have no idea where the time went. But to summarize, it seems like stricter gun laws don't necessarily equal less casualties. Would you agree?
Yeah. See, my argument isn't that missing gun laws is the sole taking away gun laws is the sole proprietor of freedom and not death. I am just simply saying that based on the statistics that gun laws put it into effect don't work.
Right.
Like claimed.
Yeah, there are other ways to do it, and I don't know if it's necessarily giving everyone a gun and having everyone walk around paranoid, but it's not either, taking away all the guns. So it's a tough issue. In this episode, we really laid out all the information and kind of presented the case, and I think we're going to come back and do a second episode on this topic, kind of talking about what can be done to course correct and hopefully bring down the violence. But this is purely speculation and based off of statistics, so... Anyway, Schyler, thank you for being on this episode. And also, everyone, make sure to tune in tomorrow when we're going to launch the second half of this conversation, and we're going to delve deeper into the gun control issue right here at the edge of the earth.
Cheers.